The world I live in is full of countless dungeons. First, a cave-type dungeon was created. Then a labyrinth-type dungeon appeared later, another one formed of the challenge tower type. In short, this is a vast world of dungeons, and along with them, there are countless hidden treasures. That's why there are adventurers who seek to conquer and claim all the great riches this world offers. However, not just anyone can become an adventurer. Only those who have been chosen can achieve it in that context. We see our hero carrying a huge bag that looks very full and has a seal on top. Then he approaches a man who looks a bit suspicious. This man explains that to enter the dungeon you need a permit, but immediately he shows curiosity about the object Nagi carries with him. He's surprised to see a bag of that size. Then our hero thinks to himself that he has become the adventurer's bag. His name is Nagi, and he is a white rank porter. Next, the adventurer shows impatience and asks how it can be that a porter arrives later than the adventurers themselves, commenting that young people nowadays are hopeless. At this, Nagi feels a little embarrassed and apologizes, explaining that it's his first time in that area. However, the man asks why he is alone and where the other porters are, adding that the Porters Association should have already received an advance payment of 50 coins. In response, our hero smiles slightly and proudly declares that he is the porter who costs 50 gold coins per day. However, the adventurer is skeptical of that claim. Raising his voice, he asks if the boy thinks this is an easy task. Then he explains that this is a dungeon where normally they should have sent at least 4 or 5 porters, and questions what exactly he plans to do. With a somewhat harsh tone, the man asks if he thinks he can carry everything necessary and also carry what they find inside the dungeon. Dramatically, he asks if he'll be able to bear even the weight of their lives. Finally, he demands to know if he has understood and orders him to return to the Porters Association and to ask for reinforcements, warning that otherwise he will cause problems. Surprised, our hero replies that he's carrying enough for 4 people. Nevertheless, the man insists that, as he already said, it's impossible for one person to carry all that. At that moment, Nagi reflects that reactions like that from adventurers are quite common, and that even if he charged 5 times the usual fee, he would still earn less than 10 coins for that reason. Instead of giving a long explanation, he knows the most effective thing is to prove it directly, so he drops his huge, decorated bag to the ground and starts picking up the adventurer's luggage, somehow managing to fit it all inside his bag. At this scene, the adventurers look visibly surprised. One of them asks what that is, and soon they conclude it's a magic bag. Smiling, our hero explains that that's all he needs to carry. Everything intrigued, the adventurers ask where he got that bag, if it's heavy, and comment that they would also like to have one. A little embarrassed, the young man apologizes and clarifies that it's a unique bag that others can't use. Then he asks if now they're going to hire him as their porter. One of the adventurers tells him not to make such a fuss and adds that even with a magic bag, a porter isn't that impressive. Despite that, that same man decides to hire him. He introduces himself as Jeffnam, a gold-rank swordsman and leader of the Fallen Wolf group. However, he raises his fist and imposes a condition. He'll have to earn that gold, and if he doesn't work as hard as 5 porters, there will be consequences. Our protagonist wonders if that guy is really the leader of the adventurer group and realizes he seems pretty strict. Then the leader orders them that they take their gear and get ready for the expedition. Excited, Nagi thinks everything is going well for him. After all, he is a professional porter full of energy and believes something big will happen before the dungeon ends. So the group of adventurers continues on their way, enters the dungeon, and our hero decides he will make sure that everyone is satisfied in the end. The reason he earns much more than the others is not only due to his skills as a porter, but also because of the overwhelming satisfaction of the adventurers he works with. As they move through the dark interior of the dungeon, it becomes clear that the adventurers dedicated to conquering these places face countless dangers. Right at that moment, it seems one of them is about to face one. Our protagonist thinks the traps could activate at any moment, not to mention enemies that could ambush them. One of the adventurers starts to advance, but the group seems ready for battle. Their leader points to some creatures and says, "Here they come." Then a fierce battle breaks out across the area. Jeff bravely confronts his opponent. Conquering a dungeon is full of unpredictable variables, and that inevitably generates a lot of stress for everyone involved. The leader asks if he didn't tell them not to let their guard down and questions if they're nervous. One of the men comments that he was scolded because of the other, and a small argument starts. Meanwhile, our hero thinks that's precisely the reason he decided to become a porter specialized in this niche market, which even seems to excite him more. Immediately after, he grabs the group's attention by reaching into his huge bag and tells them that after so much non-stop work, they must be starving blindly. He adds that he brought them some snacks. The men are stunned by what they see and start salivating, wondering what it could be. They're also impressed by the smell. They ask what it is and are surprised to see all the food. Our protagonist has prepared a real feast using his secret porter skill, the dungeon restaurant. Without hesitation, The men start eating, saying it's something special, and still hot, as if it had just been made. Another, thanking God, comments that even the salad is fresh. With tears in his eyes, one of the adventurers says he had only been eating dried meat and bread as hard as stone. Surprised, they ask if the bag has the ability to keep food fresh, and are even more amazed, thinking it might even cook it. Excited, our hero says it's something like that, although inside he thinks the real, important thing is something else. Then aloud he says they haven't seen anything yet. It seems he dips his hand in water, and in the next moment starts filling something. He just used another of his secret porter skills called the Ark of Paradise. One of the adventurers is in shock, wondering if he's at a resort, because it feels like he's in hot springs in the middle of a snowy field. However, when he opens his eyes, he realizes the environment isn't exactly like that, and yet it seems incredible to him. However, not everyone in the group is happy. The leader yells, asking if they think they're on vacation, then says doing this in a dungeon is complete recklessness. He adds that the atmosphere is so warm that it doesn't even make you want to fight, and his companion agrees. In the end, they conclude they have no choice but to accept the situation. Jeff admits he took a risk, and that he actually didn't think all this was worth 50 gold coins, to the point of having considered asking the guild for compensation. But seeing the porter's skills, he confesses that 50 coins is a bargain. Then our hero asks if this isn't really what conquering a dungeon is about. He explains that outsiders might think the difficulty lies only in facing powerful monsters, but that the environment and stress can also cause failure. He adds that failures due to bad food or lack of sleep are common stories in this line of work. He states that dungeon porters depend on the adventurers, and that to make money, adventurers need to complete the dungeons. So he does everything he can to help and ensure success, and he concludes by saying he doesn't consider it a big sacrifice. Meanwhile, the most veteran adventurer watches him surprised. He says calling all this no big deal is almost cute, and that they rarely get even a third of that treatment outside a dungeon. In fact, he confesses he had never experienced it before, and says that after receiving all that care, he feels recharged as if he could face any enemy waiting for them. Later on, he tells our hero not to worry about how the expedition will end. However, Nagi looks a little embarrassed and asks the man about his clothes. Then, as our hero moves forward again, he thinks that conquering a dungeon can be a smooth process. As another battle begins, he realizes that considering the group's skill, facing the monsters is easy. However, the real problem is the boss monster, since they always bring a series of unpredictable variables. Jeff Nam activates a power in his sword and curses the boss, calling it cunning. Then he orders the group not to give it any room to maneuver and to keep it under constant pressure with attacks. The monster roars loudly and prepares to counterattack. It tries to hit one of the adventurers, but he manages to dodge it skillfully. Then, he counterattacks by firing a burst from his crossbow, hitting the creature's leg directly. Using its web ability, the monster clearly feels the impact and lashes out furiously at the adventurers, delivering a powerful blow. Although the group is alert and manages to defend with their shields, in response the Leon prepares to attack with his weapon and uses a swordsman's skill called multiplication, managing to cut the monster into several parts. However, the creature doesn't give up and starts preparing a breath attack. But once again, the group is ready. Jeff, not ignoring the dangers of the situation, senses the imminent threat. Meanwhile, our hero watches the battle from a protected spot, analyzing the enemy. He realizes that this time, the boss is a rank B monster, a Zark lizard. Considering the group's abilities, he calculates the success probability is over 80%, although he knows that 20% chance of failure can't be ignored. And if the group of adventurers fails, that would mean the porter's death, which is not an option. So, taking something from his bag, he thinks he must intervene. He reaches in, wondering what he should take out until he finally seems to find what he's looking for. He knows the group's offensive power is enough, so creating a small opening might be enough to resolve the situation, although he feels some sadness. Thinking he's going to waste such an expensive smoked Zeta, he prioritizes completing the dungeon. Therefore, he has no other choice. The challenge, however, is like hitting the target. At that moment, the monster lunges directly at the group's leader. Then our hero thinks that no matter how unpredictable the monster's attacks are, he can aim just at the moment it pounces on one of the adventurers. So he throws the Z at the monster. It just watches the object approaching, which hits full on and releases a thick cloud of smoke. The creature seems to feel the effects of the attack. The group leader shouts, calling the porter. Finally, our hero raises a flare and announces that this is the moment. Jeff Nam, satisfied with the situation, reacts immediately. Running toward the monster, he responds that he got the message and starts climbing the beast's back, which is still in a defensive state. He prepares to deliver a devastating blow, while the creature seems to realize what's happening at the very last second. Then the group leader delivers the final blow, completely knocking down the beast, and watches it with a satisfied expression, then congratulates everyone on a job well done, ordering them to collect the loot. Nagi thinks the dungeon cleanup ended smoothly after all, but that feeling of excitement was short-lived, because immediately the atmosphere changed, and the reason was disappointing. The rewards were terrible for a rank B monster. They should have gotten at least 20 magic stones, but only 5 dropped, and the rest was trash. On top of that, most of the dungeon was infested with common monsters like goblins. That is, if you compare the effort and cost of conquering the dungeon with the rewards obtained, the result was a complete waste of time. And as if that weren't enough, those few items had to be divided among the 4 team members. So, our hero thinks maybe because of that, the joy of finishing the dungeon faded and the atmosphere grew tense. The group members start arguing about how to split the reward, showing that even dividing something so scarce can be complicated. However, feeling encouraged again, he concludes that that kind of stuff is adventurer's business and doesn't concern him since, as a porter, he has a fixed payment and doesn't depend on how much they earn. He decides that before the situation gets worse, it's time to wrap everything up, so with 2 bottles in hand, he thanks the adventurers for their hard work and adds, asking if they aren't thirsty, offering them a drink. The group looks at our hero standing next to the defeated monster. The leader smiles and comments that he even takes care of the group's needs after the dungeon, also mentioning the smoke bomb he threw at the boss, adding that finding it in this dungeon might have been the greatest treasure they got. To this, our hero laughs and says he's just flattering him for today, adding modestly that he only offered a little help with his skills. However, one of the adventurers questions that term modest skills, saying the more he watches, the more impressed he gets. He explains that Nagi pulls endless wonders out of that bag and maybe its contents even surpass those of the dungeon itself. Another jokes, asking if that bag might also contain loads of money. The most veteran adventurer adds that after all, they're talking about the porter who charges 50 gold coins, so agreeing with the captain, he affirms that the greatest treasure on this expedition was having found him. However, right at that moment, the atmosphere starts to turn strange. Our protagonist notices something's off, wondering why the mood changed so abruptly. Then something hits, directly against one of the liquor bottles, shattering it. When he turns around, he sees it was a crossbow bolt flying past him. Shocked, he yells asking what the hell that was, just as another bolt flies toward him. Luckily, he manages to dodge it at the last second, but ends up falling to the ground confused, wondering what's going on. The senior adventurer coldly apologizes, saying it was a mistake, and that he was trying to end everything without pain. He tells him to think about it. An adventurer's job is to risk their life, and the reward can't be something served on a silver platter. Another chimes in saying not to hold a grudge, explaining they're in a tough spot regarding their payments, and adds, let's be honest, it's not too much for a porter to have a bag like that. As our hero gets up, he starts to understand, so this is how things often end. A dungeon porter's job usually ends in death halfway through, and if he were to die, it usually ends in death halfway through, and if he were to die, it would be enough to say he was killed by a goblin and no one would suspect anything, no matter how hard he tries. He is always treated like a tool. Suddenly, the expressions of those who once admired his dedication turn into greedy, looks as if they now see him only as loot. But surprisingly, he is neither shocked nor disturbed. He knows this is the norm in this world. In a world where your fate is predetermined by your birth, the treatment toward porters, one of the lowest ranked jobs, has never changed. He remembers how, when he first got his bag skill, he attracted scornful looks from those who mocked him. They told him that with a skill like that he couldn't register as an adventurer, that he should settle for being a simple porter, and that if he really wanted to join expeditions, he could only do so as a dungeon porter. Thus the world made it clear he couldn't be an adventurer and imposed the porter label on him, so he wonders if these guys think the same. Meanwhile, one of the adventurers asks if he already understands and orders him to hand everything over and then die. At that moment, that same man lunges at him with his weapon raised, insulting him as a stupid porter who just carries bags without wasting a second. Our hero prepares to fight, internally questioning if that decision to surrender really belongs to him to make. He quickly reaches into his magic bag. The adventurer attacks mercilessly, but our hero manages to block the blow at the last moment. With something he pulled out of the bag, the attacker, surprised, asks if he really stopped the attack. Then our hero plants his foot firmly on the ground and charges at him. He prepares to strike and hits the enemy directly with his sword. Another senior adventurer watches in amazement as our guy pulls out, now, some kind of axe from the bag and throws it at the bearded man, hitting his crossbow directly and breaking it. The whole group is stunned to see the weapon break, and the leader exclaims incredulously, asking how this could be possible. They wonder if one of their own companions has just been taken out. Jeffnam, full of rage, shouts that this makes no sense and asks why they can't take him down quickly. At that moment, our hero pulls a third object from the bag and with a single move throws all the liquid over his attackers. They scream that it's hot. Then our guy appears through the smoke, wielding two weapons, completely focused on his enemies. With one blow, he splits one of their shields in two, leaving the man visibly terrified, then lands a direct hit that sends him flying backward from the force of the impact. Finally, our hero looks at what's left of the group, now visibly nervous about the situation. The leader can't believe what he sees, thinking that this kid just took down 3 adventurers with his own hands. He wonders how that's even possible, considering that kid was only white rank. Puzzled, he questions who this young man really is. Staring at him intently, he asks directly who he is. Smiling enthusiastically, our hero answers that he is a dungeon porter. Sometime later, the group of adventurers appears, tied up outside the dungeon, and it's then that our hero seems to notice something. A cart approaches the place, and waving his arms, he shouts that he's there. Trying to get attention and make his presence known, someone gets down from the cart, a young woman who asks if he is the registered porter and comments that she heard about a crime that happened inside the dungeon, so she has come to investigate. Her name is Petra, and she is an inspector. Looking around with some confusion, she asks what exactly all this is, then almost indignantly demands to know what the hell happened in that dungeon, but our hero tells her it's better if she hears the explanation directly from those involved. Then a sound comes from inside his magic bag. The bag plays the recording of the moment when the adventurers called him too flashy to be a porter and ordered him to shut up because they thought they were going to kill him. Petra, surprised, exclaims that this is fascinating. The young woman realizes it's a recorder disguised as a bag, and although she comments that the design is kind of ugly, our hero, now called Nagi, explains that it's actually a bag that also records audio. Petra says that in any case, she now understands that he was betrayed and that they tried to murder him, and adds that this is enough evidence. However, she admits she's curious how a simple porter managed to face several adventurers. She also points out that it seems they were poisoned with smoked mushrooms. Smiling, our hero asks if she knows those mushrooms. Petra replies that she knows enough to say they shouldn't be eaten because whoever does will suffer several physical problems, besides redness in the face. Then he, with apparent innocence, explains that to sum up, they ate supplies that had mushrooms among the ingredients, and just when they were about to attack him, symptoms started to appear. He asks if she doesn't think he got lucky. After all, how else could a porter face adventurers like them? Then, smiling again, he turns to one of the adventurers and asks if he's not telling the truth. The man looks at him, knowing it's a lie. Actually, they did eat poisonous mushrooms, but it was a trap they clearly fell for. Excited, our hero was asking another question. He wanted to know if that man was really a gold rank adventurer, even though not white rank. Both exchanged attacks with great skill, and our hero seemed capable of facing him evenly. He felt something didn't add up, even after having spent so much energy against the dungeon boss. Losing to a porter made no sense. At that moment, our hero wondered how someone could defeat even a goblin with such a slow sword. Then he charged at the adventurer with his weapon, while the other thought how humiliating it was to be surpassed by a simple porter whose provocative attitude made him lose control. Counterattacking, he tried to convince himself he was just a porter and not to consider other possibilities. Nagi, smiling while fighting, easily dodged the attacks, mocking him and saying, "Come at me again, try harder." He kept dodging without stopping the taunts. The swordsman prepared to use his technique and started throwing cuts non-stop, but our hero kept dodging effortlessly, laughing and mocking him until the end. The group leader, stunned by what he was witnessing, exploded with rage, calling the porter curse and unleashing a devastating blow that was also dodged without effort. Returning to the main point, the reason they lost to a porter was clear. Surprised, Jeff concluded it wasn't because the porter was so strong, but because he himself had weakened at that moment. He realizes his body is changing suddenly and wonders why this is happening and why he feels like he's going to vomit. Smiling, our hero asks if he hadn't told him yet and then reveals he was poisoned. Nagi explains that the food they ate earlier was laced with a toxin from Z-pulp, masked within the flavor of the dish, noting that this serves as a kind of insurance against doubtful employers like them. The group leader, writhing from the poison, calls him cursed and yells that if that's true, then from the start it was all a plan to lure them into a trap. However, our hero simply smiles, satisfied, and asks the man how a delicate porter like him could trick adventurers as experienced as they are, and states it was all just a safety measure as he had already explained. He clarifies that whether or not the betrayal happens depends entirely on themselves, and that in cases like this, he uses a catalyst to activate the poison's effects immediately, adding that normally, After completing the dungeon, he gives them an antidote to drink, which completely neutralizes the poison, but he mentions that someone made a stupid mistake. He remembers the moment when he had 2 bottles in his hands and was offering a drink, and someone broke one of them. Now visibly emotional, he asks what he's supposed to do in that situation, explaining that he only has 1 bottle of antidote left, and even though everything happened that way, even now, saying they were poisoned sounds unbelievable. So the group leader says resignedly that it's fine, that they just had bad luck and ate the wrong stew. Although inside he wonders how he will accept having lost to a porter, he cries, lamenting not having eaten all the stew himself. Meanwhile, the inspector seems to ponder everything she has witnessed. Finally, she says she understands and asks for the criminals to be taken away. One of them tells her he has finished his job and asks if he can leave, but the young woman asks him to wait a moment and asks if he's heading to the city to catch a ride. Our protagonist seems somewhat surprised by the offer and asks if it's free. Sometime later, the group is already on the way to the city. She comments that it's a shame he had such an unfortunate experience, right? Upon arrival, and that on behalf of the Adventurers Association, she offers an apology. However, he replies that it's okay and adds that porters are always treated like tools. The girl asks if he really thinks that way. He comments that maybe it's true, but there's something he needs to be warned about, although she understands it wasn't his fault. In this incident, she explains that not everyone will see it that way. She tells him that the adventurers he defeated belong to the Dawn Guild, an organization known for its arrogance and illegal activities. Therefore, no matter the reason, if one of their members gets hurt, they take revenge. So she advises him to stay alert for a while. However, in the next moment, she seems surprised by something. She calls our hero's attention, asking if he's listening, and he answers in a low voice that he is. Then he pulls the head out of that thing. Our protagonist says he already warned Gluttony not to show up in front of others because they always get scared when they see him. But the little creature complains that it's hungry. The inspector screams, scared, is asking what the hell that thing is. Embarrassed, our hero replies that it's nothing to worry about. That's Gluttony, and it's been living inside his bag. Who knows since when? He explains that this creature is responsible for organizing all the items inside the bag before it started helping. Everything was mixed up with no order at all. In exchange, it feeds on huge amounts of magic stones. Then he comments that considering how chaotic this dungeon was, Gluttony must have worked quite a bit too, but beyond that, he says he can now keep all the dungeon loot, which normally should have been shared among the 4 adventurers. Feeling generous, he comments that he's in a good mood today and asks what Gluttony would think about receiving double the magic stones this time. The creature happily starts devouring them. Petra says it's the first time she's seen that creature and asks if it really eats the stones. Our protagonist replies that it's also the first time he's seen it doing that, but assures that Gluttony is calm. The girl says it's quite fascinating, and then corrects herself saying that his bag is the fascinating thing and that she's never heard of anything like it. Suddenly, one of the horses agitates violently. Everyone is startled by the situation. She asks what's happening and why the horses are acting like that, but the soldier answers that he doesn't know, that they just started getting agitated out of nowhere. At that moment, our hero seems to sense something. He looks back thoughtfully, trying to identify that feeling. They remain there motionless, while something strange seems to be happening. Then our hero mentally confirms it. No doubt, he realizes it's a dungeon of rest and wonders why it's happening immediately. He calls the inspector and points something out to her, showing it. He tells her he can clearly feel that there is a dungeon break just beyond those mountains. Petra stops at the possibility, recognizing that it's a huge problem, and asks how he could know, wanting to know if he has some kind of magical detection artifact. But our hero replies that it's his instinct. She doesn't understand, and asks what he means by instinct. At that moment, intensely focused on the situation, he continues feeling that presence and says they don't have time to argue. They must move fast before there are more victims. Petra thinks it's absurd that he can detect a dungeon break with just his instinct, when not even she, being an inspector, can do it. However, the little creature, Gluttony, seems convinced it's a real break, says it likes magic stones and can smell them, so it must be that. It affirms that there is a strong scent of magic stones coming from beyond the mountains and concludes, with certainty, that there is no doubt. During this, Petra says she understands and that they should go investigate. Then she explains that when a dungeon exists for too long, a catastrophic event known as a dungeon break can occur, during which the monsters inside go crazy and start coming out uncontrollably, destroying everything in their path. So it's essential to subdue every dungeon that exists in this world. So Petra confirms that they are indeed facing a break. She explains that the critical threshold was surpassed some time ago and the break can happen at any moment. Intrigued, she asks how he can feel something like that from so far away. Our protagonist replies that he could never forget that sinister feeling. Then he recalls a past situation, something no one should forget when things become horrible. when a dungeon break happens. Petra wonders if this man has been in one before, but even if he had, how could he feel it from so far away? Naji says there's something strange about all this. Since being a dungeon close to a village, it's impossible that no adventurer has taken care of it yet. Petra nods and comments that according to records that dungeon had already been assigned. Then our hero asks if she knows who accepted it and what their rank is. She replies that the dungeon is classified as rank D, and that the adventurers who took it were one of rank Mithril and two of rank Copper. Upon hearing that, our hero is surprised that a rank Mithril adventurer was assigned to a rank D dungeon, which immediately raises his suspicions. He adds that he needs to go to the village to confirm something, and asks Petra what she plans to do. She asks if what's happening is related to his suspicions, then asks a guard to transport the criminals to prison instead and tells him that, as a dungeon inspector, she will accompany him. Moments later, they both set off toward the village and later finally arrive. Upon arrival, they find a strange situation. Our protagonist comments that definitely something is going on there, and Petra agrees. Some people say this should have been resolved a long time ago and that nothing has happened yet. They ask what will happen if a dungeon break erupts. A martial artist named Nero says they should take the matter to the group leader, but another man replies that it's not his responsibility. That man is Ban, a necromancer. Venus, visibly upset, shouts asking what they expect them to do if their leader simply disappeared. The villagers begin shouting, calling them bastards. Our protagonist thinks that in the end he was right. Judging by the situation, his suspicions were correct. A no-show in a dungeon happens when a high-ranking leader registers for a dungeon, but then a better opportunity arises, and so he completely abandons the lower-ranked dungeon. Petra explains that of course the association imposes fines in those cases, but our hero asks if that isn't basically a superficial solution, and she confirms that it is. Then he concludes that in the end, the adventurer can simply abandon the mission and nothing happens. However, the people of that place lose everything when the rupture occurs that same night. He knows that even if they ask the Adventurers Association for help, by the time they arrive, the village would already be ashes. Besides, it's obvious that those adventurers are just making excuses to evade their responsibility. One of them claims that they are also victims since their leader abandoned them, and now they are just wasting time taking blame for everything. Van adds that if anyone has a complaint, they should present it to the Adventurers Association, since they don't have to listen to that because according to him they are not responsible. Our protagonist watching the scene thinks that adventurers are neither heroes nor saviors, but ruthless people who only care about their own benefit. However, even with all that, in situations like these they are necessary, because only adventurers can face a dungeon rupture, not someone like him. Amir Porter, the inspector, comments that it's unfortunate but they must evacuate the village, because saving lives is the priority. Then our hero repeats incredulously, saving lives, and wonders if she really believes that's possible. Petra apologizes and asks what he's talking about, to which he responds that he was just thinking out loud. Then he says winter is coming, and for those who have lost their homes, how could they survive a long winter? He grips tightly an amulet against his chest and declares it would be impossible, then immediately throws it forward, convinced that what this village needs now is not a porter. While adjusting another golden necklace on his chest, he wonders why all this is happening suddenly. He gets excited and tells Petra to look what they have here. A dungeon rupture, happening right in the village he just visited. Then he asks if it's true that whoever subjugates a rupture can keep all the loot without paying any kind of tax. The woman confirms that yes, it's true. He laughs, saying he just won the lottery. The adventurers watch him, wondering who that guy is. They question if he's really planning to take control of that dungeon. Both are surprised to see the color of his necklace, and wonder if maybe he's a gold rank adventurer, thinking that maybe that really is possible. Smiling gently, our hero asks if they're thinking of joining too, and tells them that in that case, he could split the rewards in a 9-to-1 ratio, then asks if they have a deal. Nagi thinks that for now he'll pretend to be an adventurer, then calls the inspector and asks what the penalty is for impersonating one. The girl responds that the fine would start at no less than 1,000 gold coins. If he's not mistaken, in front of them is the portal to the dungeon, a rift connecting to an unknown dimension, and which, according to recommendations, should only be approached by gold rank adventurers at minimum in an ancient dance, and no matter how difficult it is, you just have to defeat the monsters. But there's more. When the opponent inside a dungeon is the space itself, not even the most experienced adventurers can predict the environmental conditions before entering. That makes these dungeons places to avoid given the high probability of disappearance or death. Still, they are there to make a quick raid. The inspector reports that after checking the magical boundaries of the dungeon, she has concluded it will collapse in 1 hour, so that's the time they have to complete it. But they know that 1 hour, in any circumstance, is a very tight margin, especially since it's a rift-type dungeon. Nagi comments that they can only hope it's a simple dungeon, and if so, they can't afford to lose a single minute, not even a second. Determined, they enter the dungeon, cross the portal, and a flash of light surrounds them. Petra watches impressed. Upon arriving on the other side, they see rocks floating in the air. Excited, the adventurers comment that a minute ago it was night, but this is clearly another world. One of them says that the story of the first special subjugation of a dungeon by the adventurer Van is just beginning, and the inspector also shows enthusiasm. Van adds that he will do such a good job that he will leave the association speechless. The inspector laughs and says he's only so happy because he still doesn't know anything, adding that at first glance she thought they were doomed. Our protagonist admits he thought so too, somewhat tense. Nagi says this scene feels strangely familiar to him when looking at all those stones leading to a structure up high. He comments that it almost seems as if everything was written. Then the inspector tells him they will have to climb for an hour and asks how he was able to lie like that. Smiling, he replies that now they can't do anything about it. He explains that if they had asked for help as mere porters, the adventurers would have simply ignored them, but by pretending to be a gold-rank adventurer, he got them to follow him. He adds that the situation is complicated, but if they don't subjugate this dungeon, a rupture will occur, and he asks if that wasn't the reason she came. The girl confirms yes, that's why she's there. Suddenly Nero seems excited about the idea of the raid. She asks why they are so worried, and states that this is precisely why slow humans are useless. Then she crouches in a running position, shouting that she'll reach the top on her own. She starts jumping between the rocks and climbing quickly. The boy looks worried and asks if that won't be dangerous. And suddenly, something happens to the girl. It seems like an invisible energy grabs her by the wrist. She tenses up, realizing something is wrong, and falls from the height like a puppet with no strings. The boy, annoyed, asks if she's crazy and reminds her that even in the training camp she always acted like that without thinking. She asks if he's scolding her, and he angrily replies yes, she deserves it because they learn that most rift-type dungeons have curses and restrictions. The girl tries to defend herself, saying she knows. Finally, Petra intervenes and says everything is fine, but the first thing they must do upon entering a dungeon like this is check if there are active curses. While they wonder why they are chained, the girl explains it seems to be a curse of the place, and they are connected by chains they can't see or touch. Then Nero says that in that case, as long as they are united, the curse won't activate. Our protagonist comments that after all, tricks don't seem to work in this dungeon. But fortunately, they have a complete climbing gear set. Nero is shocked to see the huge amount of stuff coming out of the bag. Excited, our hero says they must advance step by step in this type of dungeon. The best strategy is to move steadily without wasting energy, trying to climb fast. However, they shouldn't go too slow either. They have to keep a steady pace. That's why he tells them to follow him and remember that since they are connected by invisible chains, they shouldn't get too far from each other. He adds that they must always advance maintaining a constant distance. Nero comments that the group leader is a bit slow and says she'll go ahead, running, but the boy objects, telling her that instead of rushing out of haste, they should follow the planned route since that way they won't have to backtrack later, even if it's slower. However, he thinks that even following the planned path, they could run into some problems, and it seems he himself runs into one of those unforeseen events. He reflects that rift-type dungeons are always full of variables. Then he sees something strange. A stone creature opens its mouth and seems to be eating one of the floating rocks. He thinks, "You just found an unidentified monster. Its name is Stone Boar Rock Eater. It's a powerful creature but not aggressive, so there shouldn't be a problem as long as it's not provoked." Petra says she didn't expect to find one of those creatures in a place like that. She explains that according to reports, its reaction is also quite fast, but then we see it spit another small rock into the air. She concludes that it seems to be changing the dungeon's structure as it eats and expels stone. Fascinated, she says the dungeon's ecosystem is incredible. Nero laughs and says she seems happy. The girl apologizes, saying it's the first time she's seen one of those in person, but also points out that anyway, this is a disaster since the path they were following was completely destroyed, so there's only one solution. Our protagonist says they'll have to throw hooks at the stone boar and hold on with ropes. But there's a problem. If they fail and end up provoking the creature, the boar will become aggressive and they don't have the time or power to face that. Van laughs at the situation and says that's the problem, and while starting to use some kind of magic, she claims her moment to shine has finally arrived, telling everyone to pay attention to see how they overcome this challenge. Then she uses one of the necromancer's talents. Through summoning fingers, creatures begin to appear, and in the next moment, some Ragolins manifest. Our protagonist says it's wonderful since summoning skills are uncommon. Petra comments that if those creatures can place the hooks, they won't provoke the boar. However, our hero starts feeling a bit tense, wondering why something feels off. The summoned creatures start trembling slightly, and suddenly one of their heads turns abnormally. Then he begins to realize something is wrong with the way those creatures move. Nero comments this was famous in the training camp. Van was known for not controlling her summons and they ended up exploding. She shouts at her to be quiet, explaining that controlling summons is like moving your right and left hands independently while looking at yourself in a mirror. Van replies she'll do her best, and that everything will be fine as long as they cross in 5 minutes. However, our hero says he doesn't feel calm since time is pressing. So he orders them to cross quickly before everything explodes, without wasting time. He throws the hook, and the summoned creatures cling to the rock, trying to hook it. By some miracle, everything seems to be going well. The porter asks them to hold on a little longer, while Van warns that as long as the creatures are summoned, there's a kind of neural link with them. Our protagonist begins to cross, thinking that despite the setbacks, they're still having some luck. The group advances on the rope and Nagi reflects that the skills of his companions are really useful in this dungeon. He thinks those summons will make things easier. However, he starts to notice something is wrong. Since only 3 minutes have passed, Van tells them to hurry because things have gotten much worse. But our hero notices the problem isn't the rush, but that conditions have changed. The boy does his best but apologizes, saying he's about to explode. He explains he can't control the cracks that appeared when hitting the golem's head, and that he's also suffering from increasing nausea. He won't be able to hold on. The creature's surfaces start cracking. Suddenly they explode, causing a huge explosion next to the stone boar. The creature seems to have felt the shockwave and looks visibly annoyed. The hook comes loose as it loses its anchor, and the group of adventurers is thrown into the air. Our protagonist shouts that they're lost and orders them to hold on to whatever they can. He thinks that if they fall back to the starting point again, they'll never reach the top and must mitigate the damage at all costs. So he uses a secret porter-style technique at the last moment and manages to secure everyone's safety, and his bag launches them all back into the air with great force. They manage to land again on solid ground. Our protagonist asks if everyone is okay. Petra responds that she is and thanks him, though she quickly corrects herself, calling him adventurer, but adds that they've lost a good part of their progress and wonders if they'll make it to the top in time. Nagi affirms there's no other option if they want to make it. From this moment on, he says none of them will be able to use their magical abilities, and from now on, they must prepare while he pulls out special climbing gear used by porters. He explains that now they will ascend vertically to the summit and must not let their guard down for a second. If one falls, they will all fall together. He adds that the closer they get to the summit, the more traps and variables will appear. There will be areas with falling rocks, others frozen, and sections that will test their physical endurance. Nero points out a strangely shaped rock, but our hero warns him not to get close since it's an explosive rock. In the next moment, the girl screams for help, while the boy asks how much further they have to go. Our protagonist says they're almost there, asking them to hold on a little longer, but the others protest, saying he's repeated that more than 10 times already. Nero comments that she wants to fight monsters, that she didn't become an adventurer just to climb mountains. Our protagonist replies that this time he's serious, that from where he is, he can see the summit, and also the final boss waiting for them there. Excited, the adventurers celebrate, finally having found a monster. Van says he'll finally have his first official battle. The girl says she will defeat the boss and prove something to those who ranked her as bronze tier, while Van supports her, suggesting they didn't get a fair deal. Our protagonist then seems to notice something important while analyzing the physical abilities and talents they've shown so far. He deduces they shouldn't be ranked as bronze tier, and thinks maybe they were assigned that rank because one of them comes from a necromancer lineage, or because the beastmen have been enslaved for a long time. First, he comments that if something goes wrong, the leader will take care of it, and the boy nods. After all, he is a gold rank adventurer. However, our hero thinks the idea was for them to face the monster themselves. Then the inspector asks them to stop for a moment and comments that something doesn't add up there. She explains that the boss at the end of the climb is a serpent dragon, but these creatures aren't originally made of stone. She adds that if a serpent dragon is purple, there's no other explanation, unless it's already dead. Suddenly, it seems the creature opens its eyes. Our protagonist, shocked, asks what she just said. A sword seems to pierce the monster, and it looks like its owner is still there. A man is resting, leaning against the creature, wondering what all the commotion is about. Then he notices something from above. He observes our hero's group, and actually wonders if he's sensing a murderous intent. The man watches them from his position, and in the next instant, he jumps straight at them. The group of adventurers waits silently, but something passes quickly next to our hero, and the man immediately appears right beside everyone. He looks at our hero, standing next to him. The porter is impressed by his power. On his chest, he wears a different insignia, and our hero wonders if it's a rank, thinking this can only mean one thing. This incident is not just a simple dungeon abandonment. Finally, the man breaks the silence and says this is problematic, adding that he thought no one would enter this dungeon. He explains that this dungeon must be broken. Our protagonist reflects that there are many people like him who act with a very specific goal. Then the man says there's no need to complicate things and that it's already decided those four will die during the supposed subjugation of the dungeon, and that will justify the break in this world. People register at the Adventurers Guild and receive a rank according to their power. The first and lowest is the white rank, granted to those who don't have combat skills like porters, guides, miners, or guild staff. The next is the copper rank, the initial level to be officially recognized as an adventurer. Those who have minimal combat skills are classified as copper and still have abilities superior to an ordinary person. Then there's the silver rank, reserved for veteran and skilled adventurers, capable of handling dungeons effectively. Most adventurers reach this level, or that is the gold rank, which only those who possess great dungeon experience and exceptional skills can access. They become raid leaders. These are the standard ranks, although there are higher ones like platinum and mithril, which are extremely rare. It's said that those who reach these ranks are beyond human capabilities. Only those who transcend common human sense can obtain that level. And right there, surrounded by the group, is a mithril rank adventurer. Our protagonist feels tense about the situation. He clearly perceives the man's aura. Genuinely impressed, he thinks that even if everyone attacked together, they couldn't defeat him. Then he asks the inspector if she knows anything about that adventurer, and she answers yes, because there aren't many of that rank in the city. She tells him about the Dawn Guild, the same one mentioned before for its arrogance, and explains that the man is the guild's raid captain. She finally identifies him as the berserker, Durkin. The man comments that the girl's face seems familiar and realizes she works for the guild. He asks what she's doing in that dungeon and if she's pretending to be an adventurer, reminding her she is white rank. Petra says she'd like to ask him a question and then addresses him formally, calling him Mr. Turking of the Dawn Guild. She asks why he hasn't cleared the dungeon yet, pointing out it's about to collapse. She asks if it's not every adventurer's duty to prevent that from happening. However, the man, with a somewhat psychotic look, questions her about that supposed duty and starts laughing like a maniac. He asks what kind of duty she's talking about. Then he explains that adventurers act only for their own benefit and offers an example. He asks if it wouldn't be more profitable to let a dungeon break happen instead of clearing it. Petra, puzzled, wonders what he means, but our hero seems to have understood the situation. He thinks he never believed adventurers were heroes or noble warriors, but realizing there are individuals like this is disgusting to him. If this guy really plans to cause a dungeon break, then he must stop him at all costs. However, there's a big problem. Facing someone of mithril rank directly would be madness, so for now, he'll take another path with a smile. He feigns calm and says it's all a misunderstanding, that they're just adventurers who ended up in the dungeon by accident and unintentionally bothered him. Then he offers a gift as an apology, an exquisite skewer prepared by a master. Durkin, surprised, asks if that food came out of his bag, and Nagi asks if he might be hungry after so much time in the dungeon. Our protagonist knows facing that trash directly isn't an option, so he must make another decision. He decides to weaken him by other means. The man tastes the food and finds it incredible. It's hot, with a flavor that seems freshly made, and he looks delighted, stating that not only is the meat perfect, but also the shrimp. Our protagonist thinks he should eat as much as he wants, but then the man comments that there's something special. The added ash mushroom flavor is exquisite. Then he stares at him and asks if he really thought that dirty trick would work. Our protagonist realizes he's lost. The man prepares to attack, saying that's the payment for the food. The attack is extremely fast and he barely has time to react. Nagi takes the hit full force and is sent flying. The girl screams as she's chained to him, causing her to be dragged, but they manage to land on a nearby surface. She asks what they're going to do now. The man quickly approaches and mocks them, asking if they're really that inexperienced to not resist the curse of the chains. The girl gets on guard, while the man lunges at her, assuring this dungeon will be her grave. He prepares another attack while she tenses up waiting for the impact. Van shouts for her not to stay still and gets ready to join the fight. Then a great explosion shakes the rock's summit, and a cloud of smoke with sparks and flames rises in the area. From its center appears the visor Dorkin. He's surprised and asks what that brutal summoned creature is. Is the boy a beginner necromancer? Van angrily asks if he's the raid leader who allowed them to join the Papet, a dungeon, but never showed up. The man replies sarcastically, saying he wondered who the fools were that accepted the request for this dungeon that everyone else avoided, and now he understands it was them. He adds he's heard they're a bunch of fools. Van tells Nero not to be scared, that when the raid leader returns, it'll be 3 against 1 and they just have to hold out until then. Especially if the attacks remain physical, the golems can endure indefinitely, so they throw themselves into the fight with the mindset of training battles. Turkin, excited for the fight, responds with a new powerful blow that shakes the summit. Our protagonist isn't in good shape but begins to regain consciousness. While the girl asks if he's okay, she explains she gave him emergency first aid. So he thanks her and says he must have fainted for a moment. Asking how everything is going, she replies, honestly, it's not going well. Explaining that Nero and Ivan are fighting with all their might. The girl prepares to launch a direct attack, but Turkin easily blocks it. Then she spins on her feet to try another strike. But the man defends again without taking any damage and looks at her. With a murderous gaze, he grabs the golem's head and spins it, using it to crush Nero. And as expected, considering that opponent, they won't last long. Our protagonist admits he made a mistake. He should have considered the possibility that the poison wouldn't work. The girl, confused, doesn't understand what he means. Then he asks if she can tell him more about that guy. If he's mithril rank, then he must be famous. The girl confirms he's right, explaining that in close combat, he has no rival among the existing ranks and has also completed a considerable number of dungeons. He's also known for his multiple fights against other adventurers, making him a specialist, especially when using his greatsword techniques. He's famous for splitting ogres in half with a single slash. Nagi comments that luckily he doesn't have his sword at the moment, and the girl feels relieved. For his part, our hero says he hoped to hear something like a weak point, but all that is just discouraging. She adds that the big problem is that even if by some miracle they manage to defeat him, the time would already be up because they simply don't have any left. So no matter how close the goal is, they won't make it in time. Besides, he says that if it weren't for the curse of the chains, at least they could try to split up. Then our hero quietly repeats the curse of the chains, and at that moment, it seems, he realizes something important. He knows they can't see or touch them, but they are united by a chain, and that represents a problem because if one falls, they all fall. However, if he thinks about it from another perspective, maybe that could also be a strength. If one rises, they all rise. That way they could turn a disadvantage into a solution, and maybe that is the key to defeating both the mithril rank adventurer and the time limit at the same time. While reflecting, he tells himself that even if he is just a fake raid leader or even if he were the real one, he must use every card he has in hand. He knows that separately each one might not be enough, but if they combine their skills, they could have a chance. With that idea in mind, he asks Petra to analyze the terrain with her ability and calculate the distance. The woman replies that being so close, she can do it easily, even draw a map. Our protagonist smiles and asks her to do it quickly. Then the woman uses her scout talent and starts drawing with a magic pen, creating a three-dimensional map of the area. The boy is impressed by the precision of the drawing and comments that it exceeds all his expectations, saying she is a top-level researcher. But Petra just says that's basic, then asks what he plans to do with the map, and he explains that he will use it to aim at the monster, because this fight is not just against a human, it is also against a monster. Nagi explains that adventurers often face creatures stronger than themselves in dungeons, and asks Petra if she knows how they manage to defeat them. She responds maybe with strategies based on experience, but the boy smiles and tells her she's wrong. Then, he starts explaining that the secret of adventurers to defeat superior monsters is to use dirty tactics, winning thanks to those unorthodox strategies. So to defeat that monster, he will also have to get his hands dirty. Suddenly, he jumps from where he was and says he will do it the same way. Fighting dirty, at that moment, something is thrown at Durkin. Of course he notices it, and smiling, he easily catches the arrow. Our protagonist thinks he believed that arrow would work as a surprise attack. However, something unexpected happens. He uses a porter trick, a well-aimed web shot. The enemy realizes that moving has become difficult. Just then, the protagonist appears in front of him. Durkin smiles and asks if this will be a direct confrontation, thinking he now feels confident. But our hero wastes no time, reaches into his bag and throws another porter trick, a rain of mushrooms. The man watches suspiciously as mushrooms fly through the air. The protagonist announces the attack. Mushroom storm, mushroom barrier, dust, and smoke cover the entire area, and Durkin gets irritated, seeing everything clouded. Thinking this guy is a really annoying opponent, Van, meanwhile, looks seriously injured. Our protagonist asks if everyone is okay, and although they are hurt, they respond that they are still holding on. Nagi is relieved and asks Van if he can summon more familiars. The boy looks at his fingers that are still regenerating, and confirms that at least 2 remain intact, which will allow him to summon 2 more creatures. The hero says that's enough and asks them to listen carefully because there is a way out of this. However, in the next moment, Durkin breaks the webs, complains saying this is a nuisance. He's never heard of a swordsman fighting this way. He wonders if his opponent fled with his companions to another rock and murmurs that all this is a pointless fight. Then suddenly, someone appears near him. It seems that person murmurs something unintelligible. Durkin realizes it's a golem. Then he comments that throwing smoke is useless if you make noise. so he lunges toward the direction where the sound came from. With his fist wrapped in energy, he prepares to attack and unleashes another powerful blow, hitting directly against whatever is there. Smoke and debris scatter in all directions. The man seems somewhat satisfied with his attack, but in the next instant, his expression changes. A golem's hand emerges from the fog, and the creature jumps at him to embrace him. Confused by the situation, he asks how a golem can speak, but at that moment realizes the voice didn't come from the golem, but from that strange bag. Then the bag claims it has been kidnapped. Confused, Durkin wonders where he is and if what he sees is a rope as he notices our hero holding it. He suspects they plan to climb to the top, and while distracting him, but assures that since they've been discovered, they won't be able to use that rope to climb anymore. However, our protagonist replies, asking if he's really sure about that. Then he seems to be doing something. Inagil asks if they are already far enough because they need to move quickly before being caught. Forcing himself, the boy asks them to wait just a little longer and explains that it's the first time he's controlled something from such a distance. Apparently, he's used one of his last fingers. However, he says not to worry because hope is about to reach its goal. At the tip of the object, a finger hangs, and when they finally reach the top, something begins to happen. Then Van says he'll make sure everything works. The golem advances toward the dead dragon and continues on its path, even as it starts to crumble, pulling hard on the grappling hook's rope. Just a little more before reaching the boss, then he jumps, aiming directly at the creature. And from below, Van shouts to keep going. Finally, the hook sinks into the dragon and the golem begins to show signs that it's about to explode. From below, everyone witnesses the huge explosion and how the upper area starts to crack. Dorky can't believe what he's seeing. He wonders if all that was just to trap him in that place and becomes aware of the danger. He decides he must get out of there as soon as possible and tries to free himself from the golem. However, Van, with a satisfied smile, comments that it won't be that easy, adding that the thumb may be slow, but it's the strongest of all. Our protagonist keeps holding onto the rope, thinking this isn't a fight between humans, but between humans and a beast. The area where the creature was defeated starts to break apart. He reflects that there are beasts that simply can't be defeated. While watching how the creature begins to fall from above, he clarifies that his goal isn't to bring down the beast just as the defeated dragon falls directly on Durkin. The impact hits him full force. Despite that, the man can't believe what just happened. He notices that the hook and rope are still attached to the creature and still anchored up there, causing everything around him to shake. Our protagonist thinks it's unnecessary to face it in direct combat, and at that very moment, everyone starts being pulled upward by the rope. With a satisfied expression, he says to run. Durkin is terrified and can't believe everything that just happened. The group approaches the castle, floating, running at full speed. One of them shouts to hold on a little longer, that they're almost at the end of the dungeon and time is running out too. Only 5 minutes left. It's tight, but still possible. With a smile, the boy tells Nero that honestly she was a big help. With the strength she has, even he wouldn't have been able to throw that rope more than 50 meters high, and thinking they managed it just with brute strength leaves him impressed. Remembering the moment the girl threw the rope, our hero recalls it was truly amazing. She, somewhat blushing, says it wasn't a big deal. Meanwhile, the necromancer stays thoughtful, reflecting that this is something a strong person or even a fool could do. The adventurer comments just as Nero looks at him angrily, no matter what. This dungeon had someone who clearly stood out, and without a doubt, it was Van. Since he placed the rope in the exact spot and also managed to defeat Dan's very own berserker, maybe that guy is even better than a ranked adventurer. Mithril, everyone seems excited and smiling. Nagy, for his part, thinks that probably the other two had never completed a dungeon before. However, the joy of finishing one doesn't come only from incredible skills, but from the fact that everyone worked together. Doing it that way gives motivation, and that's why he believes Petra's contribution was the greatest. Nevertheless, the adventurer disagrees. He acknowledges that although the dungeon supervisor has investigative skills and did basic work, the girl was the one who created an incredibly accurate map. Thanks to that map, the group was able to calculate their positions easily. The quality of the work was completely professional, and Petra is glad to know they recognize it. Still, she considers that looking at the big picture, Naji did an excellent job designing a plan and making it work. Then she wonders if the boy is really just a simple porter and if maybe porters are much more useful than they've always been believed to be. At that moment, Van asks the leader what will happen to Durkin. After everything he did, that enemy should spend the rest of his life in prison, and the group should make sure he never becomes an adventurer again. Petra responds cautiously, saying that although it's true that man did something atrocious, it's also true that he is a mithril-ranked adventurer, and the higher the rank, the more immune one becomes to punishment. If someone is at that level, they have very powerful legal protections from the state. The young woman continues but is interrupted by Nero, who considers all that outrageous. Petra adds that probably that guy will end up getting off lightly, and so the frustration of those present becomes even more evident. The martial artist Ivan grits his teeth in anger. The necromancer, for his part, concludes that although the law works like that, if they ever meet that guy again, outside a dungeon, he will take him down again. Naji warns them that thought is dangerous after all. Durkin's power was just the tip of the iceberg. He asks them to look around. Those who were defeated belonged to the Rock Clan A, the guardians of the Citadel's entrance. The adventurer eliminated them all by himself, assuring that they would have done the same if they had had the chance. While the two fighters in the group are excited, our hero remains completely serious. He tells them what's coming next is important and asks them to carefully observe the enemy's wounds. They were all destroyed with a single blow. The adventurer's true talent shows when he uses a weapon that suits him. When Durkin fought them, he used a greatsword or his special talents, ending fights with pure brute force. The power difference was huge, comments the Micromancer. But that makes sense. If we remember, he was the one who defeated the false dragon, the panther that had taken his son. There was a greatsword lodged in the creature's heart, and without a doubt, the man even defeated the dungeon boss with a single blow. Nagi glances back for a moment. Since the guy fell along with the dragon, he had been missing until now. Suddenly, someone holds a colossal sword. With both hands, it's his weapon again. The berserker Durkin has returned. Although he seems far away, he is disturbingly close, watching the area where the adventurers are. Very pleased, he declares, "Bingo, it's time to really get started." A red light shines right next to Nagi, who looks distressed. "Damn brats," says the man as he swings a slash that cuts the ground. In front of our protagonist, the young man immediately turns and shouts for everyone to be careful. The slash keeps advancing, tearing the terrain like it's paper. The attack reaches where Van is, who panics, believing that this will be his end. The blow is so powerful that it tears part of the platform, which begins to collapse. And all of that was done from a distance. Some hands get injured trying to hold on desperately. There are 4 adventurers who, by some miracle, are still alive. Wounded, Nagi asks if they are okay. Petra, who is closest, answers yes, while a kind of chain keeps them connected. That same chain extends to Enro, who hears from his companion that the other 2 below are seriously injured. Van, in particular, was completely unconscious. Although still tied to the object that kept him alive, the protagonist understood at that moment that they were in a critical situation. Looking to one side and seeing small stones floating, he couldn't help but reflect on the incredible destructive power of the previous attack. To make matters worse, the enemy had already started moving and was beginning to approach. He wondered anxiously what kind of strange power was capable of causing such a disaster. Meanwhile, Nagi realized that if he hesitated even for a second, Durkin would catch them. The group had barely 3 minutes left, and if they wanted to avoid a catastrophe, they had to act immediately. Trying to gather courage, he reminded himself that he was a porter. His body had been trained carrying inhuman weights, so carrying one more load shouldn't be a problem. With that determination, he mentally prepared himself if this would be like moving one last load, he thought while clenching his fist tightly. The chain on his wrist began to pulse intensely. Raising his arm, he managed to lift the entire group along with him. Convinced, he told himself he would take the lead, opened his hand as if unleashing invisible claws, and began to slowly climb the stone wall. The task was exhausting. He not only had to climb himself, but also carry the others. However, the dungeon didn't stop to consider those kinds of difficulties. Time kept running, and every second counted. A few meters away, the ground trembled. Durkin was still chasing them, and had made another colossal leap to close the distance. The time margin was now smaller than ever. Despite the effort, Nagi managed to reach the top again, carrying the unconscious necromancer with him. The girls followed closely, helping each other to advance. The hourglass sand was about to run out, when something happened so fast that it was impossible to know what it was. The enemy remained tireless, completely focused on his goal, seeming even pleased by what was happening. Nagi, tense, felt the final seconds approaching. Before him stood the fate of the group, a place that seemed far away but at the same time, so close it shone with a blinding light. Finally, the adventurers managed to enter. In front of them floated the dungeon stone, symbol of their mission. Although everyone was injured and exhausted, they knew the end was near. Nagi put his hand in his bag and explained to the group that all they had to do was destroy it. He pulled out a sword, threw it forcefully at the stone, and stated that once broken, everything would end. The weapon flew straight to the target, but just at that moment, a roar echoed throughout the place. Durkin appeared arrogantly and jumped into the weapon's path. Barely a second before impact, with his own sword, he deflected the attack. Nagi's weapon fell next to the stone, harmless. The warrior stopped and began to speak in a deep voice. "Time is up," he said as a jewel began to crack, as if synchronized with the floating stone. The explosion was immediate, A huge burst of light exploded from the center of the failed impact. A red flash arose and spread in all directions for miles. In a village, a citizen watched the strange energy invading the sky with rage. However, upon recognizing it, he fell to his knees, murmured through tears that they had been abandoned, and began to. From the light emerged a creature with red eyes, followed by another, in the shape of a wolf, then a crowd of beings began to come out of what seemed to be a portal, all with a monstrous appearance and thirsty for blood. Even a shark-shaped warrior appeared, crossing the portal with a firm step. In front of this sea of horrors, a woman knelt helplessly. The girls understood that the monsters had not only revived, but kept emerging one after another. It was a dungeon break in the middle of chaos. Dorkin held Nagi by the neck, watching him with a satisfied smile. He said with delight that he never got tired of watching that spectacle. No matter how many times it happened, it was then that Nagi understood the truth. This was not the first time. Dorkin had caused breaks before. The enemy confirmed it without hesitation, explaining that someone like Nagi would never understand a dungeon that suffers. A break regenerates as an even more powerful version, and that means better rewards. Therefore, all this was happening because of something so insignificant, and consequently, it was clear that the warrior didn't care at all about the suffering of the people in that city. Mocking the protagonist's reaction, Dorkin repeated sarcastically the word insignificant. Then with a crooked smile, he emphasized that adventurers valued good rewards above all else, and added that he didn't care in the slightest about what happened to those people. Trash, according to him. Typical adventurers were not heroes or saviors, but selfish people who only thought about their own benefit. At these words, Nagi thought bitterly that he truly hated that kind of adventurer, those in which great power was combined with deep evil, and it was then that he realized the enormous suffering that kind of individual brought to the world. He reflected again, this time while watching a bird in full flight, since the bird, indifferent to the chaos, continued on its way, flying over the portal. What happened next was completely unusual, because suddenly some adventurers and a black crow flapped their wings violently, and Nagi understood at that moment that some people had a deep power inside them, and at the same time a strong sense of justice. Shortly after, someone became visible on the bird, and surprisingly, that person was eating bread with total calm while chewing. They declared calmly that they had already marked their target, as they had a serene and determined look. Then with agility, they did a flip in the air, ready to attack, and with a firm voice, stated that they would take care of eliminating that crack before it got bigger. Then they prepared a power with their sword, which seemed to be made of lightning, and threw it directly at the dungeon break, hitting the shark monster at the same time, and the impact was immediate, generating a large cloud of smoke, which unleashed panic among the enemies. As a result, the fire caused by the attack began to slowly take down some of the monsters. And seconds later, another strike hit more creatures, cornering the remaining ones, as the beasts were so confused and terrified that they didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Dorkin was still there watching everything without intervening, just like Petra, who trembled at the possibility of what could happen. And finally, the newcomer descended to the ground and with authority introduced herself as the sub-captain of the Twilight Wind Guild, named Agnes Ferb, and bluntly demanded an explanation of what had happened there. This woman was no ordinary adventurer. She was a mithril, one of the highest ranks, and although there were still living monsters, something strange seemed to be happening with the break. On the other hand, Nagi was seriously injured after the fight, and his companion, visibly worried, asked if he was okay, and despite everything, he smiled and answered yes. But he added that there was something even more important, so he asked Petra to look right at a specific point, and indeed it became clear that something was happening at the portal. Since what they saw with their own eyes was almost impossible to believe, both watched in amazement as the dungeon breach began to close slowly. However, Turkey didn't seem happy about it. Even if it was a lower-level breach, still, the man was impressed that it had been sealed with a single strike, and he commented that he thought that guild had been completely wiped out. Then, out of curiosity, he asked what had brought her there. Considering that place had been inactive for 3 years, it was at that moment when the woman began to speak firmly, calling him by name, Turakan, from the Dawn Guild, and stated that judging by the scene, no explanation was needed since, according to her words, it made no sense for a mithril rank adventurer to fail in that dungeon. So she concluded that the breach had been caused intentionally. Upon hearing this, Birkin got excited and asked if the girl was trying to start a fight, since Agnesa was someone he had always wanted to face. However, he admitted it wasn't the ideal situation, especially considering that Nagi Maiden had used more energy than expected. He also remembered that he had a strict order from his master not to cause a big commotion, and since he had already achieved his main goal while holding his great sword, he concluded there was no need to fight. Agnesa, on her part, placed her hand on her weapon and asked if he was running away, since he had turned his back, and he calmly responded, making sure not to be misunderstood, explaining that even a high-rank adventurer's success depended on multiple variables and that at that moment, he couldn't guarantee victory. At this response, Petra shouted with all her might that he was a liar, and insisted that the man had not only avoided clearing the dungeon, but had also tried to destroy their group. However, he, unbothered, simply asked if they really thought he had tried to do that. Then, smiling cynically, he stated that maybe there was some kind of curse in that dungeon that prevented newcomers from distinguishing between friends and enemies. He even hinted that because of that, the previous attack had not been intentional, which caused even more outrage in the young woman. He continued, saying they could verify it themselves, but unfortunately, the dungeon had disintegrated into dust, and that explanation, although absurd, seemed convincing enough for the association to accept it, and even for someone of white rank to believe it. Of course, all that made no sense, but countless times, the weight of a mithril rank carried more authority than the truth, no matter how many copper or white rank adventurers testified against him, since telling the truth didn't guarantee victory. And worst of all, that guy knew it perfectly and took advantage of the situation. Still, quite pleased, Duracell said they were done there and said goodbye, mockingly saying he'd see them next time, calling them puppies. Those people stood frozen, watching him walk away, relieved. Naji murmured that the dungeon breach had been stopped and immediately began showing signs of exhaustion. He collapsed heavily onto his knees, leaving the girls worried about his condition. Agnesa looked at him for a moment, noticing that the boy had been through a lot and was completely exhausted, as well as covered in wounds. Suddenly, the sound of wings beating strongly was heard, and someone said to place the boy there since Enon could take them back to the city in an instant. The girls watched as the woman gave the order to the Thunderbird, and that's how the chaotic expedition inside the dungeon rift ended. The village came to an end and received the morning without a single scratch later. The Adventurers Association paid a visit, offering apologies and promising to prevent future Aliver incidents. Although, of course, all that was nothing more than empty words. Thanks to Agnes's help, our hero was rescued and finally managed to arrive at the Western Adventurers city called Bellum. Somewhere deep within that beautiful city, it was the nest where the wind rests, the headquarters of the Twilight Wind Guild. Naji was sleeping like a baby, slowly waking from a deep sleep, and seemed unclear about where he was or even that he had fainted. He thought to himself that he had opened his eyes and was lying on a worn-out bed with effort. He sat up and asked where he was, and right in front of him, Petra was sleeping with her head resting on the bed. Little by little, the girl began to wake up from the sound of voices. Relieved to see him awake, she started asking how he felt. His other two companions were also present, acting more energetic, and saying they had really been scared. Naji, still confused, asked where he was, and said he remembered the moment Durkin left but thought he had fainted right after. Then they explained that they were at the Twilight Wind headquarters and that the kind lady had saved him. Even a priest from the church was called to heal him, which explained why he had no wounds, just fatigue, and his friends also seemed fine. He said that was nothing for a first-class adventurer and that he trusted his endurance. One of the two clenched his fist tightly and commented that anyway, since the first adventure under the name Ban had been quite a journey, then proudly said that when he saw the villagers' happiness at stopping the dungeon break, he understood what the true role of an adventurer was. A cheerful girl handed a flower to the necromancer, thanking him for protecting the people. What had started as just another dungeon in search of rewards and glory was, for those villagers, their home. Then they apologized for having been arrogant with a citizen, and both to Naji and among themselves said they would become great adventurers, and that they had saved a happy village. Our hero responded that it was good to hear that. He felt good knowing the group had protected the village. However, now that everything was over, he could finally reveal the truth. In reality, he was not a gold rank adventurer. In fact, he had a rank lower than all those who accompanied him. He was only a white rank reporter. He wondered if they would treat him the same after knowing it, and he immediately answered himself that of course not. Naji began to choose his words carefully and told them he needed to tell them something and that please, they should not get upset. His friends seemed a little nervous about what they were about to hear. Then the boy confessed that he had pretended to be an adventurer and had passed himself off as their leader. Naturally, their reaction was understanding. Nero said they understood that there was no other choice. Thus the bond that had existed between them faded, and now they were once again simply adventurers and a porter. The girl also commented that next time she would ask him to carry the gear. As they walked away, they told him the group would be out for a while and that he should rest. Finally, they closed the door behind them. Petra asked if it was really necessary to tell the two the truth, and he replied, with a smile, that both would become great adventurers. While working as a porter in that city, he would probably run into them again. He stated that it was better they learned it from him directly and not find out from others later. The girl was saddened for her friend, but he seemed determined. It was true. he was still not an adventurer, and she, in her job as an inspector, crossed paths with many. Most of them only cared about their own benefit, and would not hesitate to commit atrocities to achieve it, unlike the heroes or warriors. Adventurers lived solely to make a profit, but that wasn't the case for that boy. Even without anything to gain, he conquered the dungeon, risking his life with a single goal, to save the villagers without asking for anything in return. And because of that, even if you're not an adventurer, Petra said as she took out his hand and completed her thought sincerely, saying that he was a hero. For a moment, the boy closed his eyes, then opened them suddenly, thinking in surprise that there was no way he would be that. Meanwhile, all attention was focused on the conversation between Durakan and Agnesa during the break. The boy looked away and noticed something was happening. A bright golden light burst from the crack. It was a lucky day since it was the reward. And for having completed a dungeon break, Nagi happily moved toward the chest that was behind everyone. He used every last bit of strength to grab it before collapsing from exhaustion. Still, the boy truly felt happy to have succeeded and kept all the reward for himself for the second consecutive time and planned to check it later. However, Petra wasn't the only one who didn't fully understand the boy that day. The other two didn't either. Nero even talked to his friends, saying their leader was a porter. Van asked the girl if she had noticed it too, and she answered, obviously, yes, and the necromancer added that of course, according to them, Nagi was pretending to be a simple, unimportant porter when in reality he was a gold-rank adventurer. Our protagonist probably thought he had fooled both or that they were naive, but now the porter knew they were more innocent than he had imagined, especially since Nero claimed he would keep the secret. Meanwhile, Dorking crossed a bridge and a man told him he had heard some stories and asked if there had been interference, which he called shameful. He said they had encountered a strange swordsman and then got involved with the Twilight Wind Guild. Then he asked the berserker if he remembered Dukan against an Eslo and added that the Dawn Guild wouldn't overlook anyone who heard about that conflict, whether a fake adventurer or a member of the Twilight Wind. Meanwhile, Agnesa walked through her guild's headquarters and thought that if what Nagi had told her on the way was true, then Nagi could be something more. She recalled a conversation she had with Petra. Since there was still some time before reaching the city, she asked her to tell the whole story, how he got seriously injured and why he was there. Agnesa said she wanted to hear everything, and Petra, a bit tense, asked if she had found out that she had entered the dungeon without permission. Embarrassed, Petra asked how she knew, and Agnesa explained that the composition of her group didn't match the official records. Still, she told her not to worry, that it was just a personal conversation between them and that there would be no formal consequences. Then she added that she just wanted to confirm something. Agnesa explained that she had been investigating the recent string of dungeon breaks and had found a possible connection with the Dawn Guild, and that precisely that day one had happened nearby. Petra, intrigued, asked what the connection was, and Agnesa confirmed it, although she clarified that for now it was just a theory, but any information she could share would be useful. Petra said that if it was something like that, then she understood the importance, but that Nagi's illegal actions had to be kept absolutely secret. In fact, she said he should be praised. Then she promised to explain everything that happened, how they entered that dungeon, and what occurred while they were inside. Agnesa then reflected that the gold-rank adventurer who led them was actually just a porter, and yet they almost managed to conquer that dungeon, she believed, firmly believing that if it hadn't been for the interference of the Dawn Guild, he would have succeeded, and that would have been incredible under the command of a simple porter. He considered that what deserved the most recognition was his mindset, the fact that he had chosen to risk his life to prevent a break. Our protagonist looked at her and said that she was the one who saved him. He asked Agnesa if he was sure, and the boy thanked her again, repeating that it was all thanks to her. Then the girl said she understood and got straight to the point. She declared that by the authority of Agnesa Ferb, sub-captain of the Twilight Wind Guild, she ordered him to join her team. Smiling kindly, our hero said that no one had thanked him. The Twilight Wind Guild was one of the most prestigious in the city, or at least, it used to be. After the disappearance of the guild leader, it began to decline, and now, after a long time, a guild meeting was taking place. A girl expressed opposition to what was happening, and stated that no matter how desperate they were as a guild, they couldn't just accept anything. That girl was a gold-rank summoner. Then someone loudly said what everyone was thinking. Nines, also gold rank, commented that he agreed and that Agnesa had acted on her own. Furthermore, the man asked if the boy wasn't just a porter pretending to be an adventurer. He added that a porter and a fraud didn't exactly sound special, let alone gold rank. A bronze rank priestess intervened, asking if it was really necessary to be so harsh, and declared she was in favor of recruiting him. The girl responded that if she was in favor, it must be because the boy had a pretty face. But Pororo indignantly replied that was slander, that she had only focused on healing him, although she admitted his messy hair had a certain style. At that moment, Stone asked them to stop arguing, because there was no point in continuing since Agnesa had already left. He was a bronze-ranked tank adventurer. Al asked which side he was on while Por warned him to think carefully about what he said or he might lose his heels. Feeling the pressure, Stone began to stammer while trying to explain his point. Suddenly, someone appeared saying there was no need for debate. Immediately, another woman arrived to inform that they had been rejected. The whole group was shocked by the news. Anne seemed unable to believe it. Meanwhile, elsewhere, our hero was in his room, beginning to wrap his hands and tie his messy hair while saying that now everything was ready. His friend asked if it wouldn't be better for him to rest a little more before going out, but he said he was fine and that staying still only made him more restless. She said she understood but wanted to know why he had rejected the guild's offer since belonging to one offered many advantages. Our protagonist replied that he was aware of all the benefits involved in joining a guild, but, on the other hand, getting involved with a lot of people brought headaches, and he explained that he preferred things as they were, simple and familiar. Petra told him that if that was what he preferred, she wouldn't pressure him, but insisted that this was the second time they had crossed paths with the Dawn Guild and asked if it wouldn't be safer to be under the protection of a guild. He asked her not to worry and added that he had come out unscathed both times anyway, and asked if she really thought they would go after a simple porter. She said then it was fine and that she needed to get back to the association. Our protagonist smiled and thanked her for everything, but she told him it was she who should thank him. She said that if he ever needed anything, he should come see her at the association. Our protagonist was thoughtful for a moment, but then smiled softly and nodded. Excited, he thought about checking the reward before leaving, since he really wanted to know what he had gotten, imagining it could be a weapon or something valuable. He then opened the bag and called out to Gluttony. He practically threw himself inside the bag while asking where he had gone. He started rummaging around, asking where he was hiding, until he finally found the little creature. Our protagonist asked why he hadn't shown up when he called him and questioned that strange expression on his face, but the creature replied it was nothing, then asked if he had seen what was inside the chest, and what kind of reward they had received, but the little one said there was nothing. Nagi commented that sounded a bit suspicious, but Gluttony insisted there was nothing strange. Still, our hero didn't seem convinced. He told the creature to move aside so he could check for himself while the little one shouted no. Our hero began to open that beautiful chest, wondering what kind of treasure he might find. But suddenly he was completely amazed by what he saw. Then he asked what those things were. He wondered if those creatures were the offspring of some kind of being, but what intrigued him most was understanding why they were inside the chest. He asked Gluttony what was going on and what had happened with the reward. Gluttony looked a bit tense, then explained he hadn't done anything wrong, that he was simply organizing the bag as usual, and when he opened the chest to arrange things, he noticed there were objects inside that looked like stones. Then suddenly one of them started screaming and a small hand came out of it. The creature was fascinated by that, and out of nowhere those little beings hatched. Our protagonist thought that if that story was true, then they must be stone monsters. He assumed some people with talent for taming creatures who might want to buy them now that they had hatched. However, they didn't seem like the kind of creatures a tamer would want, and that was a problem, because he needed to replenish what he had used in the dungeons. Therefore, he wondered what he should do with those little beings. At that moment, Gluttony said they were unfortunate creatures because he had heard about them, that their parents were exploited by the dragon serpent and begged to be allowed to raise them, promising he would take good care of them. Then our hero decided that maybe they would be useful and that they would keep them for now. He told the little one to take care of them, but clarified that if they started causing problems, he would have to let them go. Excited, Gluttony said he had received permission, and added that they could stay there. Our hero seemed slightly tense, seeing this. Suddenly alarmed, he asked him to wait and inquired if there were more than 3. In the next scene, he was already out of the bag, tense. He realized it was a complete chaos inside. He saw that the reward from the dungeon rift was a total failure, but at least the reward from the cave dungeon was still left. Excited once again, he decided to go exchange those items. He arrived at a trading post and was selling all his magic stones and monster loot. The old man there handed him a bag of coins. Satisfied, he said it had been a long time since he had earned so much money, so first he would replenish his supplies. He bought more smoked mushrooms, and finally got some explosive mushrooms that he couldn't afford before. He also restocked his food supply, sharpened his weapons, and replenished his flash bombs. He set aside part of the money to give to Bananero, and finally, with what was left, he thought maybe he could take a little culinary tour for himself. So he happily walked through the city while someone watched him from a distance, wondering if it really was him, questioning if it was the young man who caused trouble with the Dawn Guild. This person thought it was just a rumor, but now he saw that the boy really was white rank. He thought sending really weak individuals to prison was one thing, but he had heard that the boy managed to face Durakan, then asked what Zero thought. Wanting to know if the boy seemed strong to him, that shadowy figure said it happened twice. It couldn't be a coincidence, and that even someone of white rank could be powerful, so they had to be careful. He explained that normally he wouldn't care about someone of white rank, but this one in particular might have a hidden ability. Then he said he had expectations and hoped the boy wouldn't disappoint him. He prepared himself from the top of a rooftop and made a powerful leap forward. Our protagonist was walking peacefully through the city. He was enjoying the moment until suddenly he seemed to notice something. The popsicle stick. He was eating broke in half, and that man grazed his face with a powerful attack. Nagi shouted, asking who he was. Excited, the man said he was starting with hostile intent, and added that the young man was already reacting, said he was sure that Nino was just a common porter, and now he was intrigued since there was something more, and that this couldn't be the end, while our hero simply smiled, wondering what that man was talking about. Without warning, he attacked again, and Nagi barely managed to dodge the blow. The opponent demanded he stop holding back and show what he was capable of, saying he wanted to see the skills he used to challenge his guild. Our protagonist tensed up slightly at the situation and wondered who that person really was. He noticed the emblem on the man's chest and realized he was a gold-rank mage, but it confused him that he fought like an assassin. Our protagonist felt all his hostility and understood he couldn't just stand still. So he decided to act and pulled a weapon from his bag. His opponent asked if he was now ready to get serious and said he wanted to see what kind of sword techniques he had used to face Jeff. Then our hero charged with some mushrooms tied to his sword and used a set of special tools specifically for porters. A low-grade explosive mushroom bomb suddenly caused a massive explosion. Smiling, he said only a lunatic fights head-on against adventurers, and now he decided it was time to run. While running, he thought he was going to die. He started screaming in the middle of the street, begging for help, asking for someone to save him, shouting for the guards, and saying someone was trying to rob him. A guard approached and asked what was happening. He pointed and said that man was a thief pretending to be an adventurer and had tried to kill him. The guard looked somewhat surprised by the accusation and asked if that wasn't someone from the Dawn Guild. The man commented with disappointment that the boy had fled. Our protagonist wondered if this was the revenge Petra had mentioned, but still thought it was crazy to do something like that in the middle of the city, no matter how angry they were. The guard apologized to the man and asked if he could ask him about the incident. The man smiled and asked which incident he was referring to. Then he launched himself from the ground and asked if he meant this. In an instant, he reached our hero and asked if this was a little lesson. Nagi took a strong hit and was sent flying against a wall. The man explained he had heard that boy poisoned members of his guild, ruined a dungeon, and was nothing more than a simple porter who harmed his guild. He added that everyone knew what happened when someone messed with the Dawn Guild. Our protagonist shouted that was a lie, then started yelling, explaining that it was members of that guild who tried to kill him, begging people around to believe him. They just watched. He got a bit tense, thinking there was no way out and that Petra was right. The punk had considerable influence, so in this situation, no one would take the side of someone of white rank like him, because helping him wouldn't benefit anyone. Then someone mentioned they had heard something similar, but our hero knew it was better for them to support the Dawn Guild. Some mentioned having heard that a porter had been cheating adventurers, and another added that nowadays porters acted as if they were the leaders. The guard told Nagi that he understood the situation and that, in this case, he would leave everything in his hands. The man replied that he was satisfied with that. Smiling, he asked what he thought about all that, if he had imagined how things would end, and that there was no one there who was on his side. Our protagonist asked why he went so far, saying that he already knew the truth, that his guild was the one that was wrong. He added that everything was over and asked why he was seeking revenge now. The man said he was right, that it wasn't his fault, but no one cared that low-level adventurers fought over anything. However, in the end, he had still damaged his guild, and the Dawn Guild didn't let even small losses slide. That was their way of making sure everyone saw and remembered to be afraid. Anyone who hurts the guild will pay the price. He was just a tool to make sure everyone remembered that fact, but he told him not to worry because he wasn't going to kill him. He explained that he carried the medal of the last man he killed, but it would be a waste to carry a white medal, since it had no prestige to show it, so that day he was only going to mark him, so that every time people saw the scar on his face, they would remember what happened that day. Then he activated one of his assassin skills and lunged at our hero. He used a cross-shaped slash that almost hit him. He thought there was no one there who could be on his side, but suddenly that attack hit something. He thought maybe that was what he believed in, but a woman appeared in front of him. She ordered the man to lower his weapon, explained that he belonged to the Twilight Wind Guild, and added that at that moment, any attack against him would be considered an attack against them. Nagi was walking through the empty city streets, closely followed by his shadow. That thing asked him if he was really okay with leaving things like that. He said that wasn't the result his guild would have wanted, But the man explained that there weren't many options. Facing Agnesa wasn't in his plans. He claimed that even if he had faced her alone, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But someone had already taken care of Agnes's debt. Then he added that still, in the end, all that left him with a feeling of emptiness because he expected the boy to do a little more. To be a porter, he was above expectations, but a porter was still just that, another insignificant guy. Of course, things ended abruptly. But after being chased like that, he was probably really upset, and his shadow agreed. The man smiled slightly while the shadow asked what else there was, and then a small cut appeared on the man's face. He wondered how that happened, if it was Agnesa who managed to hit him. But his shadow asked if he still hadn't realized, told him to do something slowly. He should step back, step by step, to be able to remember what had happened. She told him that from the first moment she found him. Meanwhile, Naji began to remember the attack he made while our hero dodged, until the moment the boy pulled the weapon out of his backpack. The shadow said that at the moment, Naji thought he had finished him. That exact moment when he believed everything was over, she said that Naji thought the boy had completely given up. He remembered that X-shaped slash aimed directly at the boy. Then the shadow continued saying that the boy did something that showed he hadn't given up and that he had been waiting for that opportunity. Then our hero, he pulled a hidden blade from his sleeve, already ready to counterattack. The shadow explained that even in that situation, he used the fact that Naji was above him and pulled out a hidden weapon from his memory. Our hero remained still as the attack approached. At that moment, he remembered that no one in the world would side with a porter and that he had to protect himself. So at that decisive moment, the boy threw the weapon at his opponent. That strike passed just beside the man's attack and grazed the assassin's face. The shadow asked how many times he had told Naji that the moment he thinks he has defeated the enemy is when he lets his guard down and becomes vulnerable. The assassin said that this time he really had let his guard down, but he seemed excited and said that was interesting, adding that maybe he would take back what he said about feeling empty. Then he and his shadow seemed satisfied with the outcome, deciding they would meet him again in person. Moments later, our hero put his weapon back in his sleeve, thinking he had prepared that dagger in case he couldn't pull weapons from his backpack. But that still wasn't enough to be a real adventurer. He thought that if Agnesa hadn't helped him, he probably would have been in real danger. He wondered if the Dawn Guild had really sent an adventurer of that level, just for a trivial revenge, and honestly, he didn't want to run into him again. Suddenly someone spoke to him, asking why he had that thoughtful expression, jokingly asking if he was scared, saying that after what happened, he would probably be haunted by those memories. The guy explained that that boy was notorious even within his own guild for being troublesome. He even controlled a gang of thieves, and the guards turned a blind eye. The stone man laughed and said he had heard a bit about the guild, but he didn't think they would stoop so low as to attack someone like that out of spite. Agnesa said she agreed, and that's why she thought they'd be safer in a dungeon than staying in the city, so she took them there. Then she asked why he didn't at least join the guild for the raids. But our hero said he preferred to keep doing his usual job as a porter. Naji asked if he didn't feel it was starting to get a little cold, saying it was the first time he had seen a cemetery inside a high-level dungeon that was a B-rank cemetery-type dungeon. One of the guys started laughing and asked if he was scared and added that more girls like that were like a walk in the park for them. He told him to just trust him, the Great Nines, and focus on gathering all the loot while following his lead. Our protagonist thought he wasn't wrong, because even though it was a B-rank dungeon, they had gold and silver rank adventurers and one above them all. That was the mithril rank member, and having a mithril rank member on a raid was practically overkill. But there was still one concern. In a high-level dungeon like B rank or above, it was crucial to form a balanced team to overcome the dungeon's challenges. But in his case, they were all warriors, and when a team leans too much in one direction, it's hard to handle unexpected obstacles. Then suddenly, Agnesa orders them to stop and comments that it seems the dungeon is welcoming them as a group of undead zombies appears in the area. Those creatures watch the group of adventurers, and without showing any concern, the woman prepares for combat, draws her sword, and takes a battle stance. She declares she will clear the way. Then, with a powerful strike, the undead start being cut in half. Amid the flames, she looks back. The undead begin to be cut in half amid the flames. She looks back, sensing something that catches her attention, and more enemies rush toward her position. She attacks them again and once more casts a fire arc in front of her, making her weapon spin, defeating all the enemies surrounding her. 2 or 3 of the monsters enemies spy the enemies, can't withstand the fire attack and start burning, but then from inside the flames, a gigantic creature emerges. That giant zombie stares intently at the adventurer and lets out a furious roar. Our protagonist comments that for a rank B dungeon, they're already facing a mid-sized monsters from the start, and Nines enthusiastically encourages the girl. The monster lifts a huge stone block and tries to crush her with it. After that, it lunges at the adventurer, but she dodges the attack once again, leaving the creature looking ridiculous. In the next moment, she's already behind the monster, ready to attack, then activates a magical swordswoman talent called Ignition. The monster just watches, unable to react, while she delivers her first strike. With a quick move, she hits it from behind and then unleashes a series of rapid attacks on the creature, which has no chance to defend itself. The monster roars, feeling all the wounds and the fire. She uses her magical swordswoman skill called Blossoming Flowers. Amid the flames, a burning flower blooms and then explodes, causing massive damage. In the next instant, the group just watches all that pyrotechnic spectacle. Our protagonist says that's mithril level, and everyone looks as if they're watching a blockbuster movie. Nagi admits that her concerns about the team's structure were ridiculous. She comments that she has seen many adventurers, but never witnessed such a powerful talent. A talent is an essential trait for an adventurer that allows them to use special skills linked to their class. Each talent varies greatly in capability, and there's one more reason. The reason adventurers can face such powerful monsters, especially at the mithril rank, is because they master those talents beyond all understanding. Agnesa says there's no time to hesitate and they must move quickly before those things resurrect. Then she starts running ahead. Resurrection is the big difference between cemetery-type dungeons and other types of dungeons. Monsters in these dungeons are usually considered weak compared to others of the same rank, but the difficulty lies in the fact that these creatures can resurrect no matter how many times they are defeated, so the monsters you've already beaten will come back to life and relentlessly chase the adventurers. Therefore, if your pace is too slow, you can easily end up surrounded on all sides, which makes your chances of clearing the dungeon very low, and that's why a priest is usually included in the group, someone who can perform permanent eradication or use holy water, both crucial but also costly. That undead creature that had been defeated lets out a furious scream upon resurrecting. Nines comments that the revived monsters have already caught up to them. He points out that he told her they should have brought Poro, and our hero asks what he means. He explains that there's a priestess in his guild who is like a permanent resident. He says she's a demon in disguise and always demands gold for anything she does. She always demands an absurd amount of gold to join expeditions. A demon disguised as a priest? He cries, asking if the guild is so poor it can't afford someone like Poro. Agnesa tells him to save his complaints for later, says she'll handle the enemies coming from the front, and asks Stone to slow down the creatures coming from behind, and tells the adventurer Nines to just stay back and watch, maybe cheer them on or something. Our protagonist asks if Nines isn't going to fight, and the guy looks a bit embarrassed, then starts talking about his weapon. He looks a bit embarrassed, then starts talking about his weapon, saying he ended up leaving it behind. Upon hearing this, our hero looks at him incredulously, but the guy justifies himself, saying everything was very rushed, so mistakes happen. In response, Agnesa comments that this happens to her all the time, that she always forgets all kinds of things while her companion remembers the raid where she forgot his gear. At that moment, Nagi starts laughing and says it's okay because he has a pretty large supply of weapons, then asks what kind of sword she prefers, and while pulling out several swords from his bag, he asks if a long sword would work since she's a knight, or maybe a bastard sword. At that offer, the guy is surprised. He quickly approaches our hero and grabs him, then immediately headbutts him hard and calls him stupid. As a result, our hero falls to the ground wondering what the hell is wrong with him. Immediately, Nines tells him to listen carefully, that he only fights with his own sword. Elizabeth Robb then explains it's his vow as a knight. At that moment, our hero sits down, not fully understanding, wondering what's wrong with this crazy guy. However, suddenly the stone man shouts that something is wrong with the monsters following them, then points out that there are fewer than expected, and they're also moving very slowly. Meanwhile, Agnes also seems to notice something strange. The creatures are walking, but it looks like they're stuck to the ground upon closer inspection. It seems they have something stuck to their feet, so she asks if those are caltrops. With a smile, the hero replies that it's nothing special and adds that those monsters revive anyway, right? Plus, he explains the most dangerous part of this dungeon is getting surrounded by resurrected monsters. Although they could kill them again, that would only slow down progress. For that reason, he used a porter's tool, a trap, to keep them slowed down. Then he says that's why he placed those caltrops along the path as they advanced. He confesses that he thought it was a crude tool that wouldn't help much. However, the group seems surprised by that and says it's more useful than Nines. To the warrior's despair later, the group runs through the dungeon while wondering how many more times those enemies will revive. Frustrated, Nine says if he had his weapon, none of this would be happening, while Agnes replies that now is not the time to complain because they have to escape before getting surrounded. Then someone says they can see the end of the cave. She shouts the signal for the stone man to act immediately. He activates a shelter-type talent called Stone Shield. Suddenly, several rocks rise in front of him and the creatures get trapped inside them. However, more and more monsters approach, but they can't get through, he shouts. that it's done but clarifies he won't be able to keep them safe for long, so they have to get out fast. Finally, they reach the underground area of that dungeon at that moment. Nines wonders what kind of dungeon has a huge lake blocking the path, but our hero replies that at least there's something useful, a raft waiting for them. Then Nines mocks, saying this dungeon really is considered anyway. If they want to continue, it seems they have no other choice but to take the raft. Before the zombies arrive, next Nines says it's a trap. The raft won't support the weight of all that heavy armor, and Agnes tells him to take it off since our protagonist isn't going to fight. He says he agrees and asks her to take it off. The man is stunned. Then he tells Sir Nines and Sir Stone Man to put their armor on the raft. Both obey and take off all their armor, staying only in their normal clothes. Agnes watches the scene, then starts to get tense and shouts, blushing, asking how much more they're going to undress, and Nines replies it's to reduce weight. Meanwhile, the Stone Man comments that he's seeing this again. In the next moment, the group is already in the water and continues, crossing the lake suddenly. Nines starts laughing and remembers that Agnes, she let out a scream, so he mocks her, saying that even she screams, but in the next moment her face is swollen and she has a black eye, apologizing. He then adds that he will make sure to wear proper clothes. She says as if that wasn't enough, she also left her weapon behind, and now she's useless. He says that if he had the power of a vow, he could still make all those moves, although sometimes he forgets he's gold rank. She annoys him, saying that's exactly the problem, asking why he made a vow he can't keep. Finally, our hero reflects on what a knight's vow is. Adventurers with the knight talent make a vow that represents their beliefs. This vow creates absolute rules they must follow, but in return they gain great power. For his part, Nines made a vow that he would never fight with a weapon other than his Elizabeth Robust, and because of that, he must abide by this rule. In exchange for that vow, Elizabeth Robust becomes an unbreakable legendary sword. The knight's vow is literally a trade-off. Then our hero comments that a knight's vow isn't considered a weakness, wondering why most keep it a secret. Agnesa replies that it's normal. That guy talks too much and there's no one in this city who doesn't know. Still, he insists that he and Elizabeth are invincible. However, Agnesa says he always forgets. She adds that he's always a fool, so this time she'll let it slide. Then she comments that she heard talk about that bag and that it's really amazing, asking if things disappear when you put them inside. Then she clarifies that the weight doesn't disappear completely, but at the moment something is stored. A powerful weight reduction magic activates. Even with 2 full suits of armor, it would still feel very light. To this, Stone says that's way more impressive than Nine's sword, especially after that turkey they ate earlier, which was delicious. He adds that he never imagined eating something like that in a place like this. The boy agrees they're right. Even Agnesa was busy chewing bread while rolling with that zombie. The girl blushes a little and says she didn't have a proper moment to eat. She counters, saying he was just resting while she was hunting, and he defends himself, saying he made an effort. While another asks if he's on vacation, then our hero asks them to wait a second and adds that it seems like something is about to happen. Agnesa also seems to notice it, and in the next moment, they're surrounded by multiple boats, each one full of zombies. Everyone notices the enemies, and while the boats start to approach, he says that raft was a trap meant to drown adventurers, and the girl adds that fighting on a raft definitely puts them at a disadvantage. Incredulous, Nines asks if she knew it was a trap and still got on that raft, and the girl simply confirms yes, she knew, clarifying that this is a dungeon. They weren't going to put a raft there just to help him. So Nines is surprised to learn it wasn't to help. Agnesa reflects that the problem is that even knowing it was a trap, there are too many enemies, and right now she's the only one able to fight. She thinks that even if she went from boat to boat to intercept them, her raft would become a sieve of arrows before she could get there. Then suddenly someone says to leave it to him, explaining that whatever is out there in the water is strong, so they need to be fast and break through it. She asks if he's saying his bag can help them, and our hero responds excitedly yes, but adds that everyone must hold on tight. The whole group is surprised by this. Then he uses the air compression technique, followed by the air injection technique. In the next moment, a huge gust of wind bursts from inside the bag, propelling the raft forward with a great explosion of pressure. Agnesa asks if that's wind magic. Our protagonist says it's nothing as elaborate as magic, who simply compressed air inside and is now releasing. It explains, who discovered that if he left the bag outside on a windy day, he could capture and store that air anyway. When he releases it suddenly, this is what happens. One of the undead prepares to shoot an arrow, then they start shooting at our heroes. Naji firmly holds his bag and speeds up the raft even more. The creatures are baffled by this. The girl tells him to wait a moment and asks if he is looking ahead. He explains that they block the entrance with a wooden barrier, including that those zombies set up a pretty meticulous trap. Agnes grabs her weapon and says she will clear the way, but our hero asks her to wait, and says that now they have the advantage, adds that he will also help, since fire and wind have good synergy while preparing to imitate her. She thinks he has understood. Our protagonist takes his bag and gets ready. Then they perform a combined fire and wind technique. That whirlwind of flames advances toward the barrier. The creatures just watch helplessly until they are finally hit by that powerful attack. The barrier starts to crack and catch fire, then explodes into several pieces. Among the flames, some logs appear and the group continues their path on their improvised raft with their leader proud and satisfied with the result. They finally reach their destination. She asks if everyone is okay, commenting that they barely made it in time. Apparently she evaluates the place and says it seems to be the location where the dungeon boss should be, that is the stronghold of the death zone. She states that things have escalated incredibly since it is a fortress and inside an underground tomb. Nine says it doesn't matter how good they are and questions if this doesn't seem a bit too difficult for a rank B dungeon on his part. The Stone Man points out that normal groups would have already failed. Then he asks why their guild always takes on more jobs like this. They couldn't accept an easy one ever, but their leader replies that this was the job they accepted. The Stone Man comments that their guild usually takes care of dungeons that others fail to complete, but our hero answers that he doesn't care since he's just a porter. Agnesa, however, indicates that even in a rank B dungeon, they can't let their guard down since they usually have troublesome bosses, and indeed it seems the boss is finally appearing. The undead creature asks how they dare, while its eye starts to glow with energy, claiming they have entered its paradise and calling them fools. This boss is a lich-type monster. Nines asks if they're serious that there's a lich in a rank B dungeon, and says that's typical bad luck, while his companion mentions it's the first time he's seen one. This type of monster belongs to the mage category, and enemies like this usually come with many unpredictable factors. She thinks she has already spent a lot of energy fighting alone until now. Therefore, she draws her weapon, thinking she must take it down before something unexpected happens. Then she jumps at the creature that simply watches her smiling. Most undead monsters are irrational and attack blindly. They're prey, but this one just watches because a lich is different. It's a creature that seeks knowledge even after death, and at that moment it was analyzing Agnesa, quickly understanding that she made a deliberate frontal attack to protect her allies behind her. Then she hits it with fire, and at that moment he finds his answer. The girl is surprised to see the creature disappear, and something begins to materialize above them. The elite lich now floats. Appearing above the group, he calls them foolish creatures and using his power orders them to become his servants. Agnesa shouts to get out of the way. Then that crimson energy expands. Our protagonist can't believe what he's seeing, and in front of him, the energy and chains spread throughout the room, forming a powerful magical attack. While he thinks they might be facing the worst possible scenario in this dungeon, suddenly, Agnesa stops and starts smiling strangely. Our protagonist realizes that she has just become an enemy. Nines tells the Stone Man to take a Naji and run, but his companion asks what he's going to do since no matter how strong he is, he won't be able to stop Agnesa and says they should just escape. However, Nines doesn't seem to agree and charges toward their opponents. Nines asks what he's talking about and with an excited expression says a knight never turns his back on an enemy, saying that no matter how strong Agnesa is, she has already spent a large part of her power and her flame is fading. He adds that it's no surprise she handled almost the entire dungeon alone, and that he could say it was all part of her plan, Nine's big plan, and that at this point he could face her even empty-handed. The woman starts preparing for combat and channels her energy into her sword. Nines positions himself in the middle of the hall, ready for the fight. He also begins to focus for it, but in the next moment, it seems things aren't going as he had planned. Agnesa lunges at him and delivers a powerful flaming blow. He takes the full impact, thinking what the hell was that, and wonders how she still has so much power while she prepares for another attack that almost misses this time. He keeps dodging as best as he can, and the girl doesn't give him a single moment to think. He repeats to himself that a knight never retreats, holding that stance, then in the next moment activates an unlikely knight skill called retreat. The other group members start backing away, running to get away from the girl, when suddenly Nines appears asking them to wait for him. Our protagonist says he thought Nines was going to fight her, and the man replies that he was just joking, asking how anyone could think he'd be capable of facing Agnesa. Meanwhile, the Stone Man says he didn't expect much from him anyway, since he already turned his back on a bunch of undead and again is using the same excuse, that he doesn't have his weapon. Then our hero grabs the group's attention and asks them to look over there at the water's edge. Some boats are arriving and he says all the undead just showed up. He adds that they're completely surrounded. The Stone Man thinks there are too many, while Nagi says this is bad, there are tons of undead outside, and glancing back comments about the inside, adding that Agnesa is also there. Then the Stone Man steps forward and says he'll try to buy them some time, so he uses a skill to create a powerful shield, and all the surrounding rocks start rising from the ground. He begins using his stone barrier skill against Agnesa. The girl simply watches without showing any expression and notices the rock rapidly approaching her. She jumps from where she was and starts using the rocks themselves to boost her movement, jumping from one to another as she follows her path. The stone man thinks that's exactly what he expected. Agnesa do and that she's too fast. He can't catch her with a single hit. Our protagonist is impressed by all that, thinking there must be something that, even if just for a brief moment, can stop Agnesa dead in her tracks, but he knows it has to be something really good, because a half-done trick won't work on her. So he reaches into his bag and gets an idea, and throwing something at the girl, he thinks maybe this will work. It flies past her without hitting, but somehow, it catches her attention just as our hero activates his secret technique of Porter, a skill called Seek and Take. Then Agnesa. She starts jumping after the object that looks like a small, delicious cupcake. She stops for a moment, satisfied, savoring the sweet naji. She says she had a hunch that even under mind control, she would still act according to her most basic instincts. Nines can't believe what he's seeing, but adds that he knows they won't be able to keep her still for long. So he shouts for everyone to meet up at a place to hide inside the fortress. Sometime later, she's completely out of breath and comments that it seems for now, she's not chasing them. Meanwhile, the rest of the undead are climbing the hills and trying to regroup outside the fortress. Nagi says they need to make a plan, but Nines replies that it won't be easy. He states that Agnes is being helped by that lich and comments that she should have been almost out of ether after clearing the dungeon. But since she was fed with the lich's magic, her flames came back. He adds that if it weren't for that, he would have been able to defeat her alone. And the stone man says, yeah, right. Then Nines asks, well, what is this place? But our hero says he doesn't know. He explains that judging by all the weapons displayed, it looks like some kind of armory. But Nagi comments that those aren't weapons the undead would use, so he thinks it's something else and that this place looks more like a trophy room. Nines and the stone man are surprised by this information. He explains that intelligent monsters like liches sometimes collect the belongings of fallen adventurers as trophies, which probably explains all of this. Nagi thinks the structure of this dungeon is quite challenging for their level. With a lich as the boss, it's no surprise that many raid groups have failed here, but there's something he still doesn't understand. Why are there children's toys and objects clearly not belonging to adventurers scattered around? The stone man says he once heard a story, and as he mentioned before, they usually take on dungeons others avoid. And when this dungeon first appeared, it became notorious for repeated failures. But curiously, after that, people from nearby villages started disappearing. He continues saying they didn't notice anything unusual while exploring this dungeon. But then there's this. Our protagonist is shocked and says, a kidnapping dungeon? Then he asks what his companion means, if he's saying monsters come out of the dungeon and kidnap civilians. Nines gets furious just thinking about kidnapping, then says the dungeon hasn't broken yet and wonders if the monsters shouldn't be trapped inside. Our protagonist comments that that's just a theory, since kidnapping-type dungeons are incredibly rare. Normally, monsters in a dungeon can't leave their area, and there's a theory that says monsters outside the barrier of a dungeon lose their strength, which is why only through a dungeon break can they escape. He adds that in this case, there's only one way to confirm it. They have to defeat that damn lich and see for themselves. He adds that there's no other option, that he's going to do it, and that he will kill the lich because a knight can't stand idly by in the face of injustice. This best manhwa of 2025 ends here. See you in the next videos.